There is a specific flavor of poison that comes with working under a man who believes he is a god. It doesn't kill you all at once. It's a slow drip. It builds in your veins every time he flashes a predatory smile, every time he takes credit for your sweat, and every time he reminds you that your livelihood rests entirely in his manicured hands. Most people swallow that poison. They keep their heads down, collect their paychecks, and hope the monster never turns his gaze on them. But the thing about men who play God is that they demand sacrifices. And when this particular deity decided to sacrifice the woman I loved, he forgot one crucial detail. Gods are only immortal until you find the temple where they hide their darkest secrets. Then all it takes is a single match to burn their kingdom to the ground. The production floor of Vanguard Logistics smelled eternally of hot ozone, corrugated cardboard, and stale hazelnut coffee. It was a sprawling, concrete cavern of noise and motion, ruled with an iron fist by our district director, Vance. To call Vance a Type A personality would be a gross understatement. He was a tightly coiled spring in a $3,000 tailored suit, reeking of expensive sandalwood cologne and unearned arrogance. He liked his shoes polished to a mirror shine and his subordinates terrified. Vance was a man who thrived on control, but his true passion was the humiliation of others. He viewed the people under him not as employees but as playthings. And despite being married to Linnea, the sharp, platinum blonde vice president of human resources whose office sat exactly 3 floors above ours, Vance was aggressively, compulsively unfaithful. His infidelity wasn't a whispered rumor, it was a spectator sport. Vance fancied himself an amateur photographer. He possessed a sickening habit of documenting his conquests. On Friday afternoons, when the floor supervisors were exhausted and merely trying to run down the clock, Vance would stroll out of his glass-walled office. He would corner a group of junior analysts by the water cooler, check over his shoulder with mock paranoia, and slide a glossy 4x6 photograph from his breast pocket. He never showed anything entirely explicit, just enough. A tangle of bare shoulders against a hotel headboard, a woman's face obscured by shadows, and Vance himself in the foreground, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. He would hold the photo up for 3 seconds, soak in the uncomfortable, forced chuckles of his captive audience, and tuck it away. He kept the evidence close. He couldn't risk leaving his trophy collection at home where Linnea's sharp eyes might stumble upon it. I kept my distance from Vance. I did my job, hit my quotas, and faded into the background. I had a good reason to keep a low profile. I was quietly seeing Kala, a logistics coordinator who worked at our sister branch 300 miles away in the capital. It was a long-distance relationship, built on late-night phone calls, weekend highway drives, and a shared exhaustion from the corporate grind. Kala was brilliant, warm, and possessive of a fierce independence that I admired more than anything. We kept our relationship entirely off the company radar. Fraternization across branches wasn't strictly forbidden, but any ammunition given to Vance was ammunition he would eventually fire. Somehow the shark smelled blood in the water. I never found out who slipped the information to him, but Vance discovered I was seeing Kala. I saw the shift in his eyes the next Monday morning. He paused by my cubicle, tapping his gold pen against my monitor. He didn't say a word about her. He just offered a thin, hollow smile that made the hair on my arms stand up and walked away. 2 days later, Vance announced he was taking a sudden operational audit trip to the Capitol branch. The phone call came on a Thursday evening. I was standing in my kitchen, watching the rain blur the streetlights outside my window, when my phone vibrated against the granite counter. It was Kala. Before I could even say hello, I heard the jagged, ragged edge of her breathing. She was crying. Through tears of absolute fury and humiliation, she told me what happened. Vance had arrived at her branch under the guise of reviewing their quarterly manifests. He waited until the office cleared out at 6 o'clock. He cornered her in the break room, blocking the doorway. He dropped the professional facade entirely, making comments about how a smart girl like her could move up to the regional office if she just learned how to entertain the right directors. He put his hands on her waist. Kala spurned him. She didn't just reject him. She shoved him backward, knocking over a tray of ceramic mugs, and told him exactly what kind of pathetic, aging predator he was. She walked out, leaving him standing in a puddle of shattered porcelain and lukewarm water. By Friday morning, Kala was locked out of her computer. By noon, she was pulled into a remote meeting with HR. Vance had filed a blistering, fabricated report. He claimed he caught her manipulating supply chain invoices to embezzle company funds. It was a lie, a complex web of falsified spreadsheets he had clearly prepared the night before. Because it was an allegation of theft, the company didn't bother with an investigation. They terminated her immediately, threatening legal action if she didn't sign a non-disclosure and quietly disappear. She lost her career, her reputation, and her income, all because she refused to be another glossy photograph in Vance's breast pocket. When she told me she had been fired, a cold, heavy block of ice settled in my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't punch the wall, I just listened to her sob over the speaker. The anger I felt was too dense, too absolute for a quick outburst. If I marched into Vance's office and broke his jaw, I would go to jail and he would play the victim. He would win. Men like Vance always anticipated a direct attack. They thrived on it. I needed to hollow him out from the inside. I needed to take the one thing he actually cared about, his wealth, his status, and his pristine corporate marriage to the HR vice president. I knew about the photos. Everyone knew about the photos. The question was where he kept the bulk of them. He couldn't leave them at home, and carrying a massive stack in his tailored suits would ruin the lines of his clothing. They had to be in his office. Patience is a bitter root, but it bears the sweetest fruit. I waited. I played the role of the defeated, broken employee. I smiled politely when Vance walked past my desk. I submitted my reports early. I became invisible. Weeks bled into a month, and the tension in my shoulders became a permanent ache. Then came the end of the fiscal quarter. Mandatory overtime was authorized for the production floor. I volunteered for a Saturday shift. The cavernous building was practically abandoned, save for a few junior analysts wearing headphones and the weekend janitorial staff. Around 2 in the afternoon, the heavy hum of an industrial vacuum echoed down the executive hallway. Inez, a quiet older woman who had cleaned the building for a decade, was working her way through the glass-walled offices. I grabbed a thick roll of architectural blueprints from the drafting table, tucked a mechanical pencil behind my ear, and walked toward the executive suite. Vance's office door was propped wide open by a gray rubber wedge. Inez was wiping down the exterior glass, her cart parked in the hallway. I approached, giving her a tired, polite smile. "Hey, Inez." Vance asked me to double-check the square footage dimensions on these floor plans against his bay windows. I lied smoothly, tapping the blueprints. "Do you mind if I step in for a minute?" She barely looked up from her squeegee. "Go ahead, just pull the door shut until it clicks when you're done. I'm moving down toward accounting." "Will do, thanks." I stepped inside. The air in Vance's office was stagnant, heavy with the lingering scent of his sandalwood cologne and polished leather. The door had no internal windows, and the blinds facing the production floor were drawn shut. I was completely isolated. I didn't waste time on the bookshelves or the filing cabinets. Arrogant men keep their prizes close to where they sit. I moved straight to his massive mahogany desk. The top drawers yielded nothing but premium stationery, breath mints, and performance review files. I crouched low, gripping the brass handle of the heavy bottom right drawer. I pulled. It slid open a few inches and stopped, catching on something in the back. I reached my arm deep into the dark recess of the drawer, my fingers brushing against the cold wood of the back panel. There was a false gap, a secondary compartment behind the hanging file folders. My fingertips grazed the slick, unmistakable texture of photographic paper. I grabbed the edge of the stack and pulled. It was a brick of photographs. Easily 4 inches thick, hundreds of them. The sheer volume of his depravity was staggering. I didn't stop to examine them in the office. I shoved the entire heavy, glossy block under my sweater, tucking it tightly against my ribs. I closed the drawer, smoothed out my clothes, picked up my blueprints, and walked out of the office. I pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. It latched with a solid, satisfying click. The heist was complete. Now the execution. I didn't strike immediately. If the photos vanished and his life exploded the very next week, he might retrace his steps, check security logs for weekend access, and connect the dots back to me. I had to wait for him to leave his fortress. 2 weeks later, the company announced Vance was attending a 5-day logistics conference in Chicago. The moment his flight left the tarmac, I went to work. I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night, the only light coming from the pendant lamp hanging overhead. The stack of photos sat before me like a deck of venomous playing cards. I began to sort. It was a repulsive task, sifting through the visual evidence of a man's boundless ego, but I wasn't looking for nudity. I was looking for clarity. I needed unarguable proof. I discarded any photos where Vance's face was blurry. I discarded any photos where the background looked ambiguous. Finally, I settled on 12 perfect shots. In each of these 12 photos, Vance was looking directly at the camera lens, that same arrogant, predatory smirk plastered across his face. He was clearly in various upscale hotel rooms, tangled up with 4 different women. And the most crucial detail of all, the women in these 12 photographs had flowing dark brunette or vibrant red hair. Distinct, undeniable colors. Linnea, Vance's powerful, wealthy wife, was a natural platinum blonde. There was no room for him to claim these were old photos of the two of them or a misunderstanding. The math was devastatingly simple, and the evidence was high definition. I placed the 12 photographs into a heavy, unmarked manila envelope. I wore latex gloves as I handled the paper, ensuring not a single one of my fingerprints would taint the delivery. I sealed the envelope and printed Linnea's home address using a generic label maker. No return address. No threatening letter inside. The silence would make the images scream louder. The next day, I took my lunch break early. I didn't use the post office down the street from the Vanguard building. I got in my car and drove 25 minutes into the sprawling, affluent suburbs where Vance and Linnea lived. I navigated the winding roads lined with manicured oak trees and wrought iron gates until I found the small, brick-faced post office that serviced their specific zip code. I pulled up to the curb. The sky was an overcast, slate-gray, threatening rain. I rolled down my window, holding the thick manila envelope. I reached out, grabbed the heavy metal handle of the blue USPS collection box and pulled it down. It let out a metallic squeak. I dropped the envelope into the dark chute. I let go of the handle. It snapped shut with a heavy clank that sounded exactly like a cell door locking. I drove back to work, bought a terrible cup of break-room coffee, and sat at my desk. For the first time in months, the heavy block of ice in my chest was gone. Vance returned from Chicago on a Monday. He walked onto the production floor with his usual swagger, holding a fresh cup of espresso, his suit immaculately pressed. He made it exactly halfway across the floor before his cell phone rang. I watched from my cubicle. I watched him pull the phone from his pocket, glance at the screen, and answer with a confident smile. I watched that smile slowly peel away from his face, replaced by a pale, absolute terror. I watched his posture crumble as the voice on the other end of the line, a voice that could only belong to Linnea, shrieked loudly enough that I could hear the static from 30 feet away. Vance didn't even go to his office. He turned on his heel, dropped his espresso cup right onto the concrete floor, and sprinted toward the parking garage. The fallout was biblical. Linnea did not just divorce him, she waged a legal war of annihilation. Because they both worked for the same company, and because he had used company time and company funds. Hotel rooms booked on the corporate card to conduct his affairs, Linnea took the evidence straight to the board of directors. Vance wasn't just fired. He was stripped of his unvested stock options, his pension was frozen pending a fraud investigation, and his reputation in the logistics industry was vaporized overnight. Linnea's divorce attorneys took him to the absolute cleaners. They seized the house, the cars, and the investment accounts. When the dust settled 6 months later, the man who used to play God on the production floor was living in a rented studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old sedan and facing civil litigation. He never figured out who sent the photos. He had stepped on so many people, ruined so many careers, and humiliated so many subordinates that his list of enemies was miles long. I was just a ghost in the machine. As for Calla, she took the time away to pivot her career. She launched her own independent supply chain consulting firm. Without Vance's shadow hanging over her, she thrived. Her brilliance finally had the oxygen it needed to burn bright. We don't do long distance anymore. Today, Calla is my wife. We live in a quiet house with a wraparound porch far away from the concrete cavern of Vanguard Logistics. We don't talk about Vance. We aren't angry anymore. The poison is gone. Sometimes the universe takes its time delivering justice. It requires patience. It requires you to endure the storm, to keep your eyes open, and to wait for the monster to leave the door unlocked. Karma isn't always a cosmic force that magically balances the scales. Sometimes, karma is just a quiet guy who knows how to open a desk drawer and knows exactly which post office to use. If you enjoyed this story of patience and absolute retribution, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We all know a Vance in our lives, and sometimes it just feels good to watch them lose. Drop a comment below and tell me about the worst boss you've ever had and how you survived them. Until next time, keep your head down but keep your eyes open.